Good afternoon, and welcome to Workforce Observer, where we go beyond the headlines to explore the real forces reshaping work, talent, tech, and the business of staffing. Today's guest is Sid Nayar, a strategic HR and business leader at Freshworks. He's leading the charge on AI driven HR, organizational insights, and talent development, showing us what the next generation of people strategy looks like. Welcome, Sid. Very excited to have you.
Well, thanks for having me. Very excited for this conversation.
So, let's talk a little bit about Freshworks. It has scaled rapidly. So, how do you align your people's strategy with business priorities to make sure that HR is a true growth driver and not a support function? And in this also, you could just explain to the audience what Freshworks does very briefly.
Sure, maybe I'll start there. So maybe I'll clarify for folks who may not be familiar with Freshworks. It's not a grocery company. It's a software SaaS company, and an AI company at that. So what we do basically is our core product is IT service management that we expanded to other enterprise functions, including HR. So in my role, I get to play an internal customer of our product, and it's really simplifying how do you do service management using different workflows as well as AI. So that's really what Freshworks does. To your first question regarding how do we ensure HR is strategic function, one I touched upon, that I have the privilege of being in a company that I'm an internal consumer of what we sell to our customers. So not only do I get to consume them, I also have a lovely relationship with our product teams to help them build the products that are meeting the requirements of the customers. Secondly, I think in any place, HR, especially in this age, is about getting the right talent. We are in the age of AI. That's not aspirational anymore. So in that age, it's so critical we have the right people in the right places. And HR, in my mind, is the leading function in that and not a receiving function.
All right. Thank you. Now, we all know talent markets are in flux. What new approaches are you seeing that work best in hiring, particularly when it comes to, you want a quality hire, right?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of like best practices, again, I would almost go back to getting very clear on what are we hiring for. So I think that what we are seeing is a very interesting dynamic that companies are getting more and more clear on what type of talent they want, and then are,
Right.
once they identify that, are more open to get premium dollars for that talent. We are seeing this in the marketplace. We are seeing AI talent getting amazing, crazy deals out there in terms of, but then on the other hand, you have a lot of rifts happening, a lot of challenges happening where, there's a lot of candidates in the market as well. So I think the fundamental thing that we are doing right now is getting crystal clear what is our talent demand, what do we need to scale the business, and because that's where we are in our growth journey, and ensuring that we are not only getting the right talent from a technical perspective, but people who thrive in the environment that we have at Freshworks, which is people who want to come and build things for the future. We are a company that's constantly challenging the status quo and are a challenger. And that's the mentality we are looking for as we hire.
Let me ask you, Sid, like I know HR it usually does full-time it does employees. What about your contingent workforce? Do you hire contractors, freelancers, any of that? Or is it very much no, just,
No, like any other
what's
company.
really
Yeah, like any other company we do, it's not been an over focus for us, to be very frank. I think it's in very selective cases, given we are still fairly small compared to some of the other places I've been at. And which I think is a
right?
good thing. Contingent workforce is a fantastic element of your workforce strategy, but it needs to be used very selectively, in my opinion. So we do use that, right? And we have different flavors of that, all the way from, big managed services type of offerings, as well as individual contractors, but we are getting more and more streamlined on how we break them in, especially as we are also looking to invest in what I call agentic workforce to augment some of the work
Right.
that we need as well.
Sure. And who manages your contingent workforce? I'm sure it's not HR. You have a separate
It's
sort
a
of
good
arm
question. So,
or
so HR operations, my team actually is involved in the process, but that ultimately sits into sourcing. But we are, obviously still the front door in many cases on onboarding of contingent workforce.
interesting. Thanks, Sid. Uh, you know, you're a global company with diverse teams. So I've been asking people, a lot of people are asking about this. What do you do about sustaining a high performance, including culture across borders? How does it work?
Yeah, so maybe I'll take a step back because I think there's a uniqueness about Freshworks as a company. It was a company that started in Chennai, in India, about 14 plus years ago, and was the first SaaS company, Indian SaaS company, to go IPO in NASDAQ. So we have had almost a very different challenge than a lot of US companies that tend to go outsourcing. So you have this sort of, amazing sort of moment in history where we went IPO, but then really past IPO, the realization set in now we are a global company, not an Indian company, even though a big part of workforce sits in India. And now you're hiring global senior leaders to the point now 4 years post IPO, all our leadership, senior leadership, C-suite sits in the US. And a lot of senior leaders like myself sit in the US. So in some sense, the leadership that's come in from globally perspective almost needs to know how to work with and get the best out of a global talent and a very India-centric talent as we are expanding as well. So I think the best principles don't change. I think it always starts with clarity. And this is where as we have had some leadership transitions over the last few years, our CEO that's come in, Dennis Woodside, has been very clear on what are we going to do, what are we not going to do, right? That's our strategy, and made some very, very meaningful calls. And with that, what do we expect from our talent? And that's where my world of talent development comes in is, okay, then once those things are clear, where do we invest in our talent, right? So I think regardless of geos and where people sit, people want clarity, especially in this time and age where there's so much uncertainty. They want transparency of decision making, right? And then they want a fair and equitable process where they can perform and develop and grow, right? And I think those things don't change. But in terms of geo nuances, I think it comes with listening to your employees, honestly listening as leaders, and then responding appropriately. And that's sort of what we are trying to do internally.
So it's almost a reverse situation. You came there first, and then, so I see. So what would you say the culture of Freshworks is? If I just had to ask you casually, what is
culture, in my mind, is always fluid. And I think we are in this moment that we are transforming the culture of Freshworks, right? And I think where we are headed, and we are on that journey, is really building a very much of a growth mindset and a performance-based culture, right? We have a very collaborative culture. We have a culture of, I think, has been very people-centric. And we want to keep that needless, but really build on accountability, right? Because at the end of the business, performance is really based on accountability, right? The market looks at and rewards you if you do what you say and you say what you do. And that's the big shift that we are trying to drive. And not to say that wasn't the case, but that's become the central focus, right? And that's where the shift is. Focus is also on how do we ensure we put customer first in everything we do, whether we are building solutions. This is not just the go-to-market teams. How do we design solutions? And that's why being in HR and being an internal customer and being involved in product roadmap is a step in that direction. So that's the other pivotal tenet of our culture is how do we get customer-centric, customer-obsessed? So those two things, I think, are core of our culture. And ultimately, we need to make sure that our talent that is here feels that they can make meaningful impact, not only to Freshworks, but to their careers. And that's the third piece.
I mean, you can't go far in this game without talking AI. And I know that you're like very passionate about the intersection of AI and human behavior. So where do you see AI adding the most value in talent decisions today? And where should leaders be thinking, being careful, being cautious, and not?
Yeah, so I fundamentally believe that AI has to be a human-centric approach to AI moving forward. And we need to build an inclusive talent strategy versus an exclusive talent strategy.
Explain that. What do you mean by inclusive talent strategy?
There's a lot, AI, obviously the term has been around for a while. In the last couple of years, it's becoming real. And I think with that, there's been a lot of fear out there. And the reason I feel like there's a lot of fear out there is there's a lot of folks who have talked about AI in the sense of eliminating roles, right? And that's a reality of any technology, right? When the internet came, it fundamentally changed the way we work, right? But the companies that thrive the best with those technology disruptions are not the companies that say there's no role for the human, actually take that human-centric approach and build the inclusive talent strategy and build the skills we need to thrive in that. And I think AI is doing that faster. So I feel like companies that do that well will actually do, because at the end of the day, we sell to humans, right? We need to ensure we are building solutions with AI, but keeping the human centricity in mind. So I think that's really, really important. from an HR perspective, I think this is where HR can play a leading role, right? Because HR's role has evolved drastically over the last few years. Especially with AI, I feel like HR leaders are not only talent leaders, they're also technology leaders and they're also business leaders, right? And so when we do, for example, something like workforce planning, how do you look at that holistically? How do you make sure that our people are doing the most meaningful work and we are really giving them the gift of time by automating things through AI so they can actually spend their time doing the things they enjoy doing, they have growth in doing, and they are the most impactful for the company. And I think that companies that will do that well will not only build amazing productivity in their organizations, but amazing talent and the stickiness for people to stay in those companies because they are doing things that are actually meaningful. And that's what I mean by being human centric and not thinking AI is going to eliminate everything.
I like that. I like that gift of giving time back. That's a good way to put it. So as you go through this journey, what would you say? I don't want to talk about mistakes, but what are the lessons that you've learned? Because everyone's racing to apply AI, right? In hiring, in people decisions, talent
Yeah, I
decisions.
think again we are
What
early in
would
our
you
journey.
say lessons learned?
Yeah, I
Sorry.
think we're still
Yeah.
early in our journey, so we are learning along the way, right? Um,
Yeah.
so one thing I would say is there's a lot of talk about AI, but there's not a clear winner in AI yet, right? So when you look from a
Sure.
technology stack perspective, that means there's a lot of experimentation that you have to have an appetite for, right? And a lot of companies are
Right.
finding this out, right? So even when I'm looking at
Right.
technology stacks, we don't know who's going to be the right company to, address some of these challenges. But how do you do
Right.
quick POCs, quick pilots to learn and and adapt as you move forward? I think in one end we have to be cautious about not over rotating what AI can do, right? I think there is this thing that AI is going to do everything, and I always feel like we focus so much on what AI is going to eliminate. Uh, I think the focus has to be what is not going to change. And I'll give an example. As an operational leader, at the end of the day, I am driving employee experience for all the capabilities I'm building. What will never change in my mind is that our employees want things faster, accurately, and when they need it. Those are the principles that you want to build any technology on. That's an eternal truth that's going to stand the test of time. So then, if that's true, AI is a way of delivering those things and keeping that in mind. Sometimes I think it gets so excited about the technology piece, which it is very exciting, but
Right.
get that at the end of the day, what outcome are you trying to drive? And
Right.
that's what people want. That's what not only our employees, our customers want, right? And AI is actually allowing us to do that in a lot more creative and faster ways, which is exciting.
Thank you. Let's talk a little bit about, metrics. I mean, you've led the development of real-time organizational health insights. What are the top metrics HR leaders must track in this new world of hybrid work and talent mobility? Because, despite many companies insisting that people come back to work, it's still, it's hybrid. I mean, there are people who work from home and there are people who don't. And what I have found is that people who've been in the companies for a long time, they get the culture, they're able to do it. But talent comes in, talent leaves. So what metrics are you tracking?
Yeah, so again, I think our metric journey at Freshworks is still in the nascent stage, right? So when I came in, we were just building or moving towards, well, started a launch towards Workday to even be able to get the right basic transactional information. So I think it's a journey that we are moving very rapidly towards. But ultimately, what I would say is, HR leaders tend to historically look a lot on lagging indicators of success, right? They have looked at attrition rates, they have looked at things like that. I think there is a big opportunity of how do you get a leading indicators and pulse early on, right? So for example, we were experimenting with what we called as a attrition risk indicator, right? And these are our homegrown tools. Again, we were just piloting. Can we get a pulse from our leadership and employees to see where the sentiment is, right? And based on that sentiment, maybe getting some segmentation or where we do believe there's high risk talent from a trit perspective and map that with what talent do we really need, and if they attrit, the risk for the business is going to be higher. So I think we are moving in a world of lagging indicators are fine and great. You still need to do that, but really getting more predictive and looking at things both from the employee angle and the business angle and coming that together to real insights. We're not there yet, but those are the conversations we have started to have that I think are very exciting and interesting, and can hopefully help things up front versus after the fact.
Let me ask you, talking about that, it's very interesting to me. Do you still do performance reviews and exit interviews?
We do. We do still do it. We still have our rating system, and we do exit interviews for most of our exits as well.
And you find that's useful, the performance reviews as well as the exit interviews. You find both useful.
Well, I would say.
Because there's mixed feelings about it.
So no, there is mixed feelings about it for sure. What I would say is that
Yeah.
Freshworks is in this maturity curve of being a global company. And with that, we have had a lot of leaders in the company who are phenomenal, but a lot of them actually have grown within Freshworks. And this may have been their biggest job, right? Within Freshworks. So people who've been here for 4, 5, 6, 7 years. So I think what we are doing is balancing in terms of going towards this future state, but also building some fundamental practices of how do we look at talent? How do we ensure that our people managers are doing the basics right? So I think the conversation, are performance reviews helpful or not, I think it's a really good conversation to have at a mature state. I think there's some fundamental things that we're building some habits on. I think once that maturity is consistently across the board, that is because ultimately what I would say is the reason you're doing all that stuff is to ensure you have a performance-based culture. What is actually the business metric on performance and how do you build accountability in that is another way of looking at it. But I think it requires some level of maturity and fundamentals that I think we're building still.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to ask this question because, you're an HR executive. If you had to throw out one sacred cow of traditional HR or people strategy, something everyone assumes is essential, but you think holds companies back, what would it be and why?
Well, maybe this will be a message for my HR colleagues. What I would say, I don't know if it's a sacred cow, but I feel I meet a lot of HR professionals that talk to the business in the HR language. And if you've been in HR, you understand that language, right? I would say the sacred cow is...
Give me an example of the language.
The example of the language could be, 9-box. Could be things like, talent development, right? Like all these things that we feel are very, very, sacred to us as HR. Mm-hmm. The litmus test for me is we need to flip the conversation to see what are we doing to drive the business forward and how do we meet the business in their needs, and are we just adding steps for the business to do certain things? And I think it was kind of behind the question you asked, are performance reviews helpful? It's a question we should always ask. Are these processes helpful? We have done that because we've always done them, or fundamentally we are helping the business grow forward, right? So the sacred cow is thinking of us as less as HR professionals, but as business leaders and putting ourselves in the shoes of the business and saying, okay, whatever we do, does it pass that litmus test? Is it driving the business? Is it making the employee experience better? Or is building the foundation for a better, culture, environment within the company that allows us to do those things? If it's not, then I think we need to challenge it and say, why are we doing it? Right? So I don't know if that's a sacred cow, but I think it's a switch in mindset because the lines between talent, technology, and business are so blurred now that I don't think we can be sitting in an HR tower telling the business what to do. I think we need to be with the business and not just as HR VPs, as somebody who's running operations to really understand what the business wants and what they need and then cater solutions accordingly and hopefully drive the business forward as well.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you for that. Now, I just want to say, looking ahead, what do you see as a single, it doesn't have to be one big shift, but what do you see is the shifts coming in how companies attract, manage, and retain talent? And I know that's a biggish question, but what is happening in the world of work? What do you think is going to change? Or maybe not a change. What do you think is going to happen?
So I'll answer maybe part of that question, which I think is going to be the biggest change. I think we are not only entering, but almost here where our workforce is not just the human force, but there's an agent and bot force. I was at an event last week with Workday Rising, and they actually shared that platform where you can actually see organizational structures with human, employees and agentic employees all part of that. And you can start assigning OKRs and goals and targets to your bot force. We are there. We are getting there, whether you like it or not. That's what it
Yeah, to
means.
your digital, it's a digital workforce.
Yeah. You basically have this sort of hybrid force, right? And that's going to be, I think, the biggest opportunity was fundamentally is shifting of how do you look at that. I feel as a leader, as and just as a human being, the biggest thing I can give myself is a gift of time, so I can spend my time in the most meaningful things. And that's what I wish for all my employees and everybody at Freshworks. HR can play a big role in freeing up space that our agentic workforce can actually do of what a lot of the works that our humans are doing. And humans are doing the work of creativity, innovation, really taking the company forward by providing them the gift of time and space to actually be thoughtful. Because most of the agentic, capabilities today is more what I would say generative versus predictive, right? And I think that's the biggest shift, whether it's how you attract talent, right? How you manage and go and beyond that. And that actually, I think, is something that is a very net new muscle all of us have to build.
I'm just wondering how that would play out because it would mean job losses, right? Because if you're getting a whole digital workforce to work alongside by you, how would that play out? I guess there would be new jobs that would this
Yeah,
would
so
create because
So when you say job losses, right? The way, and again, I'm not saying there will not be, right? Especially for specific
no, no, of
individuals.
course,
But with every technology transition shift, there are two things that happen, right? And the question I always ask is, am I eliminating cost and then reducing headcount, or I'm repivoting my headcount to do more stuff, different things, right? So if your growth curve is going, and if continues, and that's the story that we see at Freshworks, our growth curve going, the size of the company will evolve, our revenue will evolve, so the work is just going to grow. So it's not necessarily we are not thinking in terms of like reducing specific headcounts. That doesn't mean may not happen. We are looking at how we redeploy that to do more. So for example, I look
right,
at my headcount pretty flat going into next year, but my scope is going to go very high and continue to increase that. So that's the other story of that. Now, that doesn't mean the individuals that are doing the job are going to be the same individuals that are going to be doing this other jobs. That comes down to, I think, the
right.
talent and the growth mindset of the individual. We need to, as companies, invest in that. But there are going to be times where people don't want to transition, right? Or they may not have the capabilities or the development capacity. And that always has happened. And that's why the one thing that I always say to in looking for talent is people who are constantly learning and unlearning skills are the ones who thrive in every transition, right? People who have a very fixed mindset that my value is because I'm an expert in X and that's it will always be left behind, and they always have been. And that's not hopefully a callous comment. That's really coming from a place of we as human beings need to constantly re-evolve, as companies are constantly re-evolving. And if you do that, you will, I believe, will have a role to play in the future we're headed to.
I guess my next, I just would say, how do you look for that and how do you train for that? Because sometimes, people don't have that quality, but they're willing to kind of say, okay, I've got to go there. So what do I do? So what do you think?
So I
Because,
think
you talent,
first thing is it starts with what you just say, I want to go there. So the first thing, you cannot create human desire for evolution and change. That has to be inherent, right? So the
inherent
first part
in
of your
you.
question is you have to identify people who are willing to evolve and acknowledge they have to evolve, right? And um,
Yeah.
one of my favorite questions when I interview folks is, tell me, give them a situation where maybe completely out of their remit, and how would they approach it? Because what I'm looking for is people who can look at a situation and come up with a way of evolving and their thought process and solving a problem versus folks who have, well, this is the only way you can do it. This is what I've done it, right? And think about all the evolutions we've had. So I think that's the first thing, is really identifying who are the people who have the understanding that
The
they
desire.
and the desire that they want to evolve, right? And the second part of, so that's the diagnostic piece. The second part of that is really, as company, we really need to double down on development, right? So as
Yeah.
we cannot just keep implementing technologies without investing in the skill sets needed to manage these technologies. The skill sets, how we do work. So for example, one of the things that I'm advocating currently is the role of HR, and in my role, I actually see four roles for HR leaders to play in AI. One obviously is looking at our tech stack, especially as an operational leader. How do I
Mhm.
build AI to execute processes more efficiently, reduce any compliance and error, and ultimately drive a better experience for employees. Second, how do we look at AI and this agentic workforce in combination and harmony with our human force to really do workforce planning for the company better and helping leaders to do that? Third is building a talent strategy for developing these skills, right? So once you have identified these are the folks we really want, like you have to invest in them, right? Because these AI tools, you still need a skill set for that. And ultimately, what I would say is, which I think is not talked enough, unfortunately, in AI, in HR yet, is ethical use of AI. How do we make sure that we are not coding bias in AI? We are having the same level of governance, the way we would not have bias in an interview for a human. If we are going to go down a path of having a AI bot doing that, how do we guard ourselves? And that's a partnership. And the last piece of that is how do you really build a movement internally for people to embrace AI tools to do their day job differently, right? And that's another place that I think HR can play a big one. So that's what I would say.
That was great. Thank you. Any last pieces of advice? I know you spoke with your HR colleagues, but you want to speak to everyone and say anything? If I had to say one last
What I
piece
would
of
say,
advice.
I am actually very excited about where we are in HR. Fundamentally, because I think it's an enormous opportunity for all of HR leaders to be business leaders and lead. In the times of uncertainty and that uncertainty revolving around people and talent, and the intersect of talent and technology and the transformation that we are seeing, we need to be leaders. We are not back office. I don't look at my role as back office. My CHRO doesn't look at her role as back office. We need to be in the front because our leaders, our business need guidance. They need help. So we need to educate ourselves on the technologies. Even if you're not running HR operations, you need to understand what's happening in AI, and be thought leaders and bring that very human-centric perspective that we build an inclusive AI talent strategy moving forward. Because I do believe companies that do that are going to be the winners in the coming time.
Sid Nayar, thank you. It was a pleasure.
Same here. Thank you so much.